Hi, I'm Ash. I love gymming. I love watching sport, hanging out with friends when I get a chance, and finding small hidden cafes around any city I'm in, and admittedly drinking far too many cups of coffee in a day.
Lovely. And I love that it's a bunch of fun facts, like three or four, versus most guests just give me one. For listeners, this is Ashlesh Chandrapu, and this is probably the only time on the episode I'll be taking his full name because he loves to go by Ash. So this is Ash. He's a third and final year student at KCL, so King's College London, in central London, majoring in history. And so today we'll just be hearing more from Ash about choices he's made, lessons he's learned along the journey of college, as well as I'm sure there's going to be a lot of value and insight and wisdom which we're going to be sharing for all the young high schoolers listening as you're about to jump onto this sort of new train and embark on this new journey in your life. This big word that I'm aiming to sort of deconstruct on the podcast, which is university or college. So, yeah, welcome to Uni Unveiled. I'm your host, Arya Darur, currently studying at Minerva University. And welcome, Ash. Excited to get into the conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Awesome. And so we're just wrapping up the summer break. And so I would love to begin by asking you. It's my first summer break, and I'm having very mixed emotions about getting back to uni. But what is sort of your mental and emotional state now, especially since you've got only 1 year of university left?
I think honestly, it's difficult to believe that the first 2 years have passed so quickly. It feels like just yesterday that I was, preparing. I was packing my bags. This time, like 2 years ago, I was packing my bags, getting ready for the first year. I was frantic about what I had to take. Did I have enough stuff in this suitcase, that suitcase? That whole procedure of moving in. So it feels like that just happened yesterday. And now to think that 2 years have flown by, it's crazy, to be honest. So I guess I'm looking forward to making the most of the next year that I have left. I can't wait to get back. Honestly, so in the summer now, I dropped off my cousin's sister at university in Mumbai. We went to drop her off for her first year, and I remember while through there, I was just thinking, God, I can't wait to be back at university. Sorry, yeah, just to get back with my friends, be in the accommodation again, be around campus. So yeah, I'm really excited to get back.
Yeah, I really miss my friends. 3 or 4 months is a very long time to be away, especially when folks are all over the world. And so it's difficult to schedule a physical meetup with many of them.
Yeah.
And time genuinely flies. Like I remember thinking after even my first semester that 1/8 of my journey is done. And then after the first year, I remember thinking that 25% of the journey is done. And
Yeah.
so it's sort of either the countdown starts beginning even after the first year. And so you're sort of like, it's down 3, 2, 1, and then we're at graduation before we know it. So yeah, and I think a lot of people enter freshman year and sort of that whole year flies by without many eventful things happening. And so they sort of take that time to socialize and party. But I always love telling people that it will go by in a snap. And so even freshman year is like that time to set up the foundation for
Yeah.
the upcoming 3 years to come. It's 1 out of 4 years. Like don't take it as lightly as many people take it.
Hmm.
So yeah, what are some goals or intentions or priorities, this could be personal and professional, for the last year at KCL?
Oh, I'd say that I think this year my biggest goal professionally is to, my dissertation's coming up. So I'll talk about that side first in terms of academics and professionally. I'd like to nail that dissertation, put a good show in that. And also my applications for law school. I'll be applying to law school next. So my goal is to hopefully be admitted into a law school or into the program and then hopefully go forward from there. So that's what I'd say professionally and academically. And then personally, honestly, just make the most of the year. I've always said to my friends, when I'm there, I always maintain that any chance I get to spend with them, I'll take because you never know how time flies. Like I said, 2 years have just gone by. So I guess personally, just taking as much time as I can, spend it with friends, go out, explore the place, explore the city. I'm so lucky to be studying in London.
Yeah.
Explore the city, see parts that I haven't seen yet, and I guess just take it all in and make the most of the year ahead. On a personal note, I'd say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And an assumption I'm making, and this is probably a big assumption, is that there are many history geeks listening to this particular episode. Even if they're not just in KCL, they're probably interested in hearing from you what it's like to study history at university. So, could you give us sort of, I'm sure it's super long, but what's a brief summary of your dissertation?
So the dissertation, we haven't actually had it fully decided yet. But what my plan is and what I'd like to do is to do a dissertation on the making of a independent India and look at how post-independence India has sort of grown in a number of aspects, economically, socially, and politically. Those three things, and see how sorry, and see how the country has gone from just getting its independence to the present day, where it's a global powerhouse in a
Mm.
number of ways, and also just sort of just map that journey and look at the key factors throughout the journey, what different steps have sort of been crucial, what setbacks have been encountered along the way, because there's always setbacks, and just sort of map that journey and I guess just learn more about it as I go. I think
Mm.
that's what I'd be looking to go for with my dissertation. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thread I'm seeing across a lot of episodes, and this is with friends in like US, UK, wherever, different countries, Canada and Australia, is that research skills actually become very important in university. And
Mm.
many of us, because of the high school education we've gone through, I feel aren't well trained enough to be jumping into like super good academic research, and we don't have those foundations set up in terms of research for university. And so I would love to spend actually 2 minutes with you here on research skills.
Sure.
And this could be a mix of soft and hard skills. But what do you think are like valuable skills within this field of research? Like what would help make your dissertation a high quality one in terms of good research?
I'd say it's using a mix of primary and secondary sources and primary secondary research. So, if I can carrying out, first hand interviews or first hand, first hand getting first hand accounts from people who had been through that sort of phase of independence and
Mm.
seen India rise in those different ways. So I'm just going to relate it to this dissertation. So to give examples, so that would be one aspect, and then also reading literature. I'd say is a big part, especially history, is reading academic literature that's already out there. So reading books, reading journal entries, articles, reading other academics in this field and seeing what they say about this particular topic, and trying to understand that and incorporate that into your work. And I
Mm.
think something very very interesting, something that's helped me over the first 2 years, is looking at different perspectives on one topic. You're always going to have contradicting perspectives in an academic field. I feel like, especially in a subject like history, where it can be interpreted in so many ways, right? So I think being open to having a holistic view of it and seeing all different aspects of that one particular matter or topic, and then formulating your own opinion, I think is a big thing when it comes to research. So, not shying away from reading things that may go against what you believe, because actually, if you read something that goes against what you believe, you either are open, your horizons are open to something new and a new perspective, or you almost reinforce what you believe because you're
Yeah.
like, no, I don't agree with this for this reason, and it reinforces what you believe, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are the kind of the key things I'd say when doing research, and something that things that I'd focus on this year.
Mm. I think you laid out really well. Even for a high schooler listening, they can begin sort of working and honing these skills even before entering university.
Absolutely.
It applies to everyone, but especially for someone who's clear in their mind about pursuing further education after undergrad, master's, PhD, law school, business school, whatever. Honing those skills right from high school, I think, will give you a head start at university.
Absolutely.
And to what extent did KCL help you with developing these skills, and to what extent was it sort of self study and something you taught yourself?
I'd say it was a mix. I did the IB when I was at school, and I think my essay writing skills in the IB um, developed a lot with the help of my teachers. Subjects like English, geography were two of my sort of favorite subjects where I had to write essays, and my teachers were always sort of very 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 big on developing points, showing different perspectives, and not making it sort of like one sort of with one focus, or sort of having like blinders on when you write it.
Yeah.
This way, be able to look at all aspects and then come to a conclusion. So I think I developed those skills in school, but I definitely had to advance them in university. That's something I noticed. So the first few essays I wrote, they were not specifically in the style that history essays should be written. They were more like sort of English essays or research essays or like literature essays, more like that, because that was my favorite subject in school. So my essay writing style was more like that, right? So then actually, I had a seminar leader, Chris Jepson, in the first year. He helped me a lot with sort of the form or the style of writing that you need to adapt into in history, and sort of being very focused on what academics are saying and integrating that into your work, quoting and citing other sources and other materials in your work that has been used in the field to reinforce your point, you know. So he really emphasized heavily on that. And so yeah, I think it was a mix of developing it in the IB and at school with the help of my teachers, and also at university. And I think just taking all of that knowledge together and combining it to have the skills I have today, I guess that's it.
I'll push you a little further here. When you
Yeah.
talk about style, what is sort of the style of a good academic history essay expected of like a college student like yourself?
I'd say I think, you know, firstly is at the start of it, you want to make it very clear what you're going to present and what you're going to show. That's something that I've been told a lot, and I've been trying to follow. And it's worked well for me. The essays that I've done well and got good marks, it's always been almost me presenting my theory, hypothesis, thesis, or whatever it is I want to get out of the essay at the start, and then say that I will be presenting it through the essay and talk them, almost tell a story with my essay, you know. And I think also something very big has been using evidence, using other historians and academics. They're very big, or whatever module I've done, you know, I've done a range of modules from economic history to social history to, you know, the history of migration, and then, you know, history of colonialism. They've all been very big on referencing other academics and talking about how your argument is situated within their arguments that are already there. So talking about how what I believe is situated and aligns itself with what some historians may believe, and actually goes against what some historians may believe, you know?
Mm.
So
And
I think those are the key points. Sorry, yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I think minus the many times that answer you said history, I feel like a lot of what you said might apply more broadly towards essay writing broadly in a
For sure.
discipline like social sciences, arts and humanities. I was sort of making connections to an economics essay I'll be writing, or a psychology slash philosophy essay I'll be writing for uni. I think the structure is broadly similar across at least these domains in terms of thesis, setting up evidence, telling a story, being compelling, arguments, counter arguments to those counter arguments, and so on. So yeah, I think especially with style, you can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's very much a practice and a numbers game, and so this is sort of something which I don't think can be taught to you in sort
Yeah.
of this laid out, but it's sort of you write essays and the feedback you get from someone who's experienced will like refine and hone the style. Do you think
I
that's
think that's right. Yeah, it's a developing skill. I'd say, you know, it's a ever sort of improving skill and an ever developing skill that you will learn. I still think I have so much to improve on and so much to learn when it comes to my essays. So I think every essay you write, every piece of feedback, you sort of synthesize your format or your formula for writing essays with every one that you write and every one that you get back. Because, you know, this year, for example, I had one essay I wrote that there was one sort of particular thing that I didn't do well, but then in that essay I did one thing particularly well. And then the next essay I wrote, I had a similar thing. I had one thing I did really well, one thing I could have worked on. And I think you then sort of pick them all and put them together. And I think by the end of the year, I was probably writing essays that I would say were of my highest standard so far at university. So picking all the feedback together. And I think something very important that I'd say is don't be afraid to try new things in an essay. Take new approaches. Like I had an essay, an economic, you know, the history of globalization. So it was an economic linked, an economic based essay. And, you know, I tried something new, and I got credit for trying it. And I got credit for, you know, taking that approach. But also I got feedback saying, whilst this approach was a good idea, it was a smart way to take, it may undermine your overall argument because of this. So like by trying new things, you discover new ways of writing, new arguments, new ways to look at it, new lenses in which you can approach a question. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, but it'll only develop you further and improve your skills. So yeah.
You also get new feedback that like making you keep making the same mistakes again and again, you'll be getting the same feedback
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
You experiment and take risks, you'll be getting new feedback. And I mean, to all listeners in high school, like you do with your teachers, I'm sure in high school, please don't be afraid to literally chase behind your professors for feedback. Like that
Yeah.
is the most valuable aspect. Just writing essays and turning them in by itself isn't going to improve the quality of the essays, but like actually taking time, if possible, sitting down with the prof, having that chat about the essay, so you can be asking them follow-ups as well. How can I, like they point out a mistake, how can I improve that mistake? Feedback from my professors is probably number one biggest thing which has improved my quality of essays over the first year at Minerva. Again, something which I might be biased. This might just be a Minerva thing, but I'm getting this general trend on the episode that a lot of assignments in university are like big and also slightly ambiguous, and sort of you have the freedom to take it in whichever way you want. And so this is not just you. I've heard this come up on the episode multiple times. I feel like that's a big jump from high school to university. In high school, even for my IB classes, we would have a structure, we would have deadlines, we would have people following up. It was sort of very clear in that sense, and the teachers always there to sort of handhold and spoon feed me along the way. At university, I think it's a big jump. I've heard people say that no, the professor doesn't care if you turn in the assignment or not. You just get a zero if you don't. No one is there to handhold or spoon feed. And
Yeah.
so I want to talk about two different aspects of assignments which might be challenging for high schoolers jumping into university. One is sort of ambiguity and sort of even for your dissertation, it's sort of so vast. You can feel free to choose your topic, choose your approach, choose your style. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is sort of just setting deadlines, being motivated and getting stuff done on time so that you're not scrambling and rushing towards the end. So would love to touch upon these two aspects with you and how have you handled that as a university student, writing your essays and doing your assignments?
So I think one thing actually before I go into both of those is with regards to the professors, and you're like, I have seen that in like the big classes, the bigger modules, I've heard from friends that, the professors don't engage with them. This is actually from other courses, not from my course. Professors don't engage, and if they turn it on, they don't turn it. It's like it's on the student. But personally, what I've experienced to my great satisfaction actually is a lot of assistance from my seminar leaders and professors on essays. Actually, like so, if you as a student take the initiative to ask them for a meeting, or schedule a meeting to get their advice and their help, they actually are very, very helpful, and they take the time to really, they won't give you the answer and say, write your essay exactly on this, write this, you'll get a good mark. But they'll say, you could develop these points, you could look at it from this angle, you could try this. So I think actually I've got a lot of support, and I have received support in that aspect. So I think that's something that I'd say to incoming university or college students is that don't be afraid to ask for help from your professors. They will more often than not be very happy to help and happy to take out the time. And I do that for all my essays that I write. I ask for a phone meeting, even if it's 5 minutes, just to run my plan by them. I'll plan it out, go to the meeting, be like, this is my plan. Do you think it's good? And many times it'll be like, this is good. You can add this, or this part may not fit in with the overall theme, or actually look at it completely from a different angle and try this. And every time, all of the feedback I've ever received, I think has helped me with the essay I've finally produced. So that's one thing I'd say before the other 2 points. I'd say that's something to,
Awesome.
to be reassured of that, there will be that help. And I think so when it comes to the ambiguity, I like it personally. That's the thing I love about literature subjects is that in literature, in these subjects, history, English, there is no right answer. There's not just one direction you can take it. I mean, there will be some questions like facts and factual knowledge that they have to be right. But in terms of the broader way you approach an answer, there's no one way, right? And I think whilst it can be daunting for some people, the freedom and the ambiguity with which the question is posed and the 100 different ways you can approach it, I think once you find the way that you like, it's actually very enjoyable. And the biggest thing when you have an open-ended question is I'd say make 3 or 4 different options. I always do that. And I like to write when I do my plans. I don't type because my mind works very fast and very messily when I'm thinking of ideas. So if you look at my page, it's an A4 page that probably nobody could make sense of, that I couldn't make sense of 1 week later, I think.
Yeah.
I'll make that plan up and then go ahead and write it. So make 3, 4 different plans, different ways to approach it. You can sometimes make one and just scrap it. Sometimes I'll make one and just tear the page. No, I'm not taking this one. I think find the different ways you can approach it, and then you'll find one that hits. You will definitely find one that you'll be like, okay, yeah, I like this. I'm going to go with it this way. Sometimes even whilst writing, I'll have changed my approach halfway through. I did that with the economics essay I was talking about. Originally I was going to approach it by giving, 2 or 3 different case studies. 2 or 3 different case studies. But halfway through writing on my first one, I thought, no, I want to go fully in depth in this and give only this one and use, my full word count on this. So I think there's so many different ways you can approach it, and don't be scared to try different ways. And eventually you'll find the one that you think works best. I think, sorry, the other question, if you could just repeat it for me, it was...
Just in terms of sort of self-motivation and staying on track.
Okay, yes, yeah.
And not rushing and scrambling towards the end. How do you take care of that?
If I'm being brutally honest, I'm probably one of the people who waits to write a day or two before it's due, only because it's the way I've always worked. I feel I work best under pressure. Maybe that's because I played a lot of sport growing up. I like the feeling of a little bit of a deadline on me. I
Mhm.
feel like I do my best work during those phases. So, but I also don't like wait till like hours before. I'll do it a day or two. But what I do is I'd say plan. I'll always have my plans done very early. Sometimes I'll do a plan and actually write it a week later or 2 weeks later.
Mm.
Let's say I know an essay, the questions come out, I have a month to write it. I'll plan it off in the first week and I might write it with 3 days to go. But for me, writing is very fast and very easy once I have the plan. Excuse me, sorry. So I think make that plan early, especially for essay writing subjects, if that's what you're doing. And then once our plan's done, the writing part is not the hard part. But yeah, don't leave for like the day off, for like hours before. I generally do it maybe 2 days before. Like I have a bit of time before I do it. So yeah, it's as long as you have a clear sort of path in your head of how you're going to submit it, when you're going to submit it, when each part of it is due, and when you want each part done. I think you're okay.
Even for like a 2000 or even a 4000 word essay, I find that when I have whatever I know I want to write in my mind, the actual writing doesn't take that much time. The
No, of course,
planning
right? Yeah,
is actually what takes up the bulk of my time. Like that's what takes up maybe 60, 65, 70% of the time. And the rest is actually just sitting down and typing on the computer. So I absolutely agree. Some people, I'm sure, work well under pressure like yourself, but planning beforehand is probably very important so that when the deadline comes, you sort of just pedal to the metal, typing it out, and you know what you're saying. This probably applies to high schoolers as well. I've made this mistake so many times. But when you write the plan, make sure it's something you can understand a week from now.
yeah.
So have, like, take the extra effort, make two extra notes, be detailed, and don't use those short forms which many of us forget like a week later when staring at the document. So I think that's also just a very important thing I'll add in here. But I would love to unpack further. This has come out even in previous interactions with you, just how much you have a passion and an obsession with like the subject of history overall. And so I love diving into this with every guest on my episode as to how they sort of came about the understanding of this is what I really love doing and this is what I want to do. So
Yeah.
it's sort of two sides of the same coin, but I would love to ask what you love so much about history and why it appeals to you, and plus what was actually the journey of finding out that this is the thing I'm going to do in college and not 100 other things.
It's interesting actually. You'd be surprised to hear this probably. I chose history because I knew I wanted to do law to begin with. And I actually didn't take history at in IB,
Okay.
surprisingly. So people might be surprised to hear this. But now, I mean, right now, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I wouldn't take it back or change it for a thing. But actually, when I started it, I said, okay, I'm going to do history because it's a gateway into law for me. I wanted to do a different degree first and then go into law because I wanted to potentially apply to American law schools afterwards. I
Mm,
mean, I had the option of America or staying in the UK and doing something called a law conversion course,
mm,
which is a year after your undergraduate degree. You do a year's program, and then you can take your qualifying exams for the bar and for the to become a solicitor, which is what I want to do. So that's the reason I took history to begin with. But I'd say now, looking back on it, I'm so glad I did. And I think the part of history that I've loved so much is, and I found so fascinating, is the fact that if you look at the way the present day is, right? If you look at today, society today, from an economic, from a social, from a geographical, like physical perspective, environmental, everything, the way that the landscapes are, the architecture of any city around the world, the way the financial systems run, the way institutions teach education, the things they teach, the way languages are spoken, every part of society has been shaped by different periods of history coming together and forming what we have today. So that's something I found really interesting is how looking at events of the past have shaped and built up to today. And in particular, I've studied a lot about colonialism and the British Empire and the way that colonies of the empire have been shaped under colonial rule, the way that been impacted. And the way that they've then gained independence and how they've been shaped over time and why they are the way they are today. I think that links into what I want to do in my dissertation, looking at how India has, from the point of independence today till today, has shaped itself and grown, and how every event that's taken place, good or bad, good for the country, bad for the country, how every event over that time that has taken place has shaped it into what it is today. I
Mm,
think that's probably the part of history that interests me the most, is how, I guess everything that there is today has been shaped by something, and that it's all like a knock-on effect. There's been a domino effect in history, and that you can't have what you have today by removing even one small piece
yeah.
of history, I think. So yeah,
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, furthermore, I was just thinking about how our history professor Minerva very famously says that everything has a history. And so
yeah,
there's a history of computer science, there's a history of economics, there's a history of biology. So whatever in the world you're studying, it is worth it to take a class on the history of that
yeah.
particular subject. So yeah, I'm really glad that we touched on this. I could see the passion coming through as well. I want to speak specifically to people who might be interested in pursuing history in undergrad, but probably are not sure what they want to do after. And so you're very clear about wanting to go to law school after. But in
Yeah.
the case of,
Yeah.
let's say, your friends and classmates doing history at KCL, someone with a history undergrad degree in college, what are
Hmm.
potential future options after they graduate?
I think a lot of people go into law. That's the biggest one that I know, is law. A lot of people also will go into further academia, so research, and they will specialize and do PhDs and doctors and masters all in one particular area of history that they love the most. And if they want to investigate further, they'll then write papers, they'll publish papers. For example, like in many of our seminars, we work with PhD students who are our seminar leaders, and
Okay.
they're specializing in certain aspects of history, certain eras and periods. So that's one aspect. I think politics is one that I know people go into. History does lead into politics. So yeah, and then teaching as well. I know a lot of people that go into teaching. I've heard that they pull teaching from history. So yeah, but I think honestly the biggest one is law,
Yeah.
because of, again, the research skills, the essay writing skills, that ability to do the grunt work of research, reading papers, and
Yeah.
then getting your argument out of it. So yeah,
Mm. It sets you up well for law school, is what you're saying. The skills you pick up in undergrad are setting you up for success in law school.
absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
100%.
Um, you mentioned American law schools, and so I'm guessing I'm going to actually rewind 3 or 4 years back to
Yep.
you as a high schooler and walk through just some of the decisions you've made. And so you talked about why history. I want to also touch upon why the UK
Mm.
versus, let's say, US, Canada. I'm sure I'm not well aware. I'm sure there are good countries with good history courses and good law schools. So what drew you to the UK specifically?
I'd say with the UK, so I grew up and I went to school in the UK. I was born in India. For our listeners, I was born in India, but I grew up in the UK in terms of my schooling, from the age of 2 till about, I would say, 18, 19. I was in the UK. So my plan was always to study there. I think that was the main plan. I had considered American law school as well, but I think I chose to study in the UK and pursue things in the UK because I was familiar with the place. And I knew that going away to university, living on my own, I was very excited about it, but I also knew it would be a big step and something quite new to me. The feeling of going out into the big wide world on your own. And I thought it would be nice to do it in a place that I'm somewhat familiar with, right? Because then I'm not discovering everything afresh. I
Hmm.
know some stuff about the place. I know some stuff about the way of life and the way that I want to say society works. Not that it works crazily different across the world, but you get what I mean. Just the way that it works in that particular place. The small things, the transport, the travel, you
Hmm.
know, the daily rituals or the habits that people are into and things like that. So I think that's why just the familiarity of the UK, I think, really sort of stuck with me, and was the reason I wanted to stay and do university and do my university course in London, as compared to anything else. I think, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's very important, especially when everything else around you is unfamiliar. Like I'm sure classes are unfamiliar and friends are unfamiliar and professors are unfamiliar. Having some level of familiarity with the place becomes very important. Makes your adjusting period much smaller versus someone like me who was just like thrown into this new environment and I had to learn everything from scratch. And so I definitely think it's very subjective. Some people love, like you, to stay in the place where they're comfortable. Some people love to be thrown into that new environment. It's sort of, I think, just making the choice very intentionally as to what you think you can really handle. Sorry, did you have?
Actually, Yeah, no, I was going to say actually, I mean, I love traveling myself, and I think I can see myself when I'm older. I'd love to live in like 10 different places across my life. But I think the reason, so, I love adventure, love traveling, going around. Actually, I don't want to be rooted in one place after I graduate. I want to visit different places, different continents, backpack across. I've always had a dream of driving a motorbike across South America with my brother. So I love traveling and exploring new places. But I think the reason I think university, I stayed where I was familiar was because it's a place where I knew I'd live almost for a couple of years,
Mm.
and I had many friends staying in the UK, um, and I think I just knew life here. So as much as I love to travel and go abroad and see new things, I thought, okay, let me do my undergrad here, and then because I also even still I had the option to go and do my law school in America
Mm.
whilst being after doing my undergrad in the UK, right? So my undergrad for that reason was always sort of fixed in my mind to be in the UK. So I'll start off where I'm familiar and then go out into the rest of the world, hopefully. So
Mm.
yeah,
I love that you said that because I had a very interesting episode with someone who's studying in Milan, Italy. And so immediately my reaction to him when we first spoke was, wow, like, how is it studying in Milan? And he told me, like, very brutally honest answer that it's very different being a tourist in a city like Milan versus a student in a city like Milan. And so after about 2 weeks of art museums and operas and pizzas, then what? Like you're living in this place for 3 years. You're not just a tourist visiting, touch and go. If you don't like the place, 10 days later you're out and you're back home. You're sort of making the choice to live here for 3 or 4 years. So I really
mm,
like we touched upon this. I think it's a factor many people don't think about enough. Like they think about getting into the grade school and they think much less about where the school is located. But I think that's really something that should be higher up on the priority list.
yeah,
According,
no,
um,
absolutely, I agree,
yeah.
I agree.
Awesome. And in terms of location, I have for some friends studying in the UK. They're outside of London, so an hour, 2 hours away from London. I'm sure it's such a beautiful experience to be like in the heart of literally one of the most culturally rich and prominent cities in the world. I'm very related to the course you're taking as well in terms of history, and so would love if you could talk through how do you engage with the city of London. This could be both personally as well as professionally.
So I think I'll start with professionally and talk about personally. With regards to a university, there's been a couple of essays that we've written that we've had to do on, sites across London. For example, I wrote one essay on the statue of Robert Clive. Um,
Mm.
he was an officer in the British Empire, and he was, from a British perspective, fantastic. He was a hero, and he was responsible for a lot of gains towards the British Empire financially. He was responsible for tax collection in India, in certain regions, and so he helped the empire profit massively wealth. But from a colonial perspective, it's a representation of someone who was actually responsible for a lot of bloodshed and a lot of oppression and a lot of a lot of sort of just unjust behavior and inequality. So I think I've interacted with in that way in terms of, from my course, we've looked at one statue, one monument, and looked at it from both perspectives. It's been very interesting to look at from that way. And then personally, oh, it's been amazing. London's been fantastic. Going around with friends, there's so many different things to do. Like you're never short on new places to go. New there's this one place called Bollybolison, which is like a small, like, it's a ball pit, come club, come dance floor, come like bar, everything, those kind of things. So that's one place that actually one of the first places I went to with friends in the second year that I really enjoyed. There's so many different things. Friends still send me reels about this new place we should try when we go back, and you're like, we've been there for 2 years and we still haven't touched maybe 10% of what there is to explore out there.
Mm.
So personally, it's amazing. There's so many places, so many sites, museums, parks. Like, if I know clubbing is something that happens a lot. I'm not a massive clubber personally, but like different, like cool restaurants. I love cafes. So small different cafes that are around London, discovering them. Just yeah, I think from a personal perspective, and I think from a student life perspective, whatever type of interest you may have, it's fantastic. It caters to you, and there's just a wide and endless array of places to visit, things to do. So yeah.
Minerva actually, like all my Minerva seniors have spent a semester in London.
Okay.
Unfortunately for my class, they canceled the rotation. So I was like, that was
Wow.
probably one of the things I was most disappointed about. Because I mean, there's something magical about that city. Like I feel like globally, there's maybe a few cities that I consider like magical: New York, London, and a couple more, where it's just you could be there for years and still really not know the city. As you said, like 2 years, and so you've only known about 10%, 20% of that place. Um,
Yeah.
Actually brings me perfectly to my next question. Want to ask about so far at KCL, one of the renowned schools in the UK.
Yeah.
From whatever I've heard so far, it seems like you really enjoyed your time there. You've enjoyed the people you've been mingling with.
Hmm.
What's been one super enjoyable and pleasant aspect of attending KCL? And also any limitation or downside or any possible drawback of attending KCL?
I'd say the best part about attending KCL is the people there, the people I've met and the connections I've made there. Like it's London's a metropolitan city, and so that means students from KCL are from everywhere, all over the globe, from all different walks of life, different backgrounds, different disciplines, different ages as well. you know and I think that's the best part of it is the range of people I've met. I've made connections that I know now will last me a lifetime, at university and in my accommodation. And and these are with people that have come from all different parts of the world. So I think that's been the biggest thing that I've loved, and that's the one thing that I would never change. How much ever, you said if you paid me this much to change, would you let it be changed? I'm like, no, yeah, that's priceless. You can't change the connections that you make and the experiences you gain from learning and just meeting people from all walks of life. I think that's been the biggest thing for me that I've loved. And I know I'll take those connections and bonds and friendships through my life now. So that's been amazing. I think one downside, on a lighter note, is the travel. I'm not a fan of the tube system in London. It's cramped, especially during peak hours. It's horrible. You feel like you're playing Tetris trying to fit into the tube.
Yeah.
I carry a big backpack as well, so that's a nightmare. Sometimes, I mean, I've had this thing once where I've got to run, but my backpack's not, and the door's shut on my backpack. So I think the thing that I'd change, or I wasn't the biggest fan of, is the tube travel. But again, that's a very first world problem, if I'm being honest. So it's not really that much of an issue. It's just if I had a dream or a wish, I'd make that a bit lighter. But yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point, which sort of triggered a light bulb in my mind. I love talking about throwing yourself into diverse communities of students, and so we touched upon diverse nationalities, majors, walks of life, socioeconomic backgrounds through which people come to university. Something
Mm.
I haven't mentioned even once on the podcast, which I think relates to my Minerva experience well, is like age diversity. And so maybe a lot of the Indian listeners might be very used to people finishing high school, 18, maximum 19, and jumping into college. There are
Mm.
so many students at college quite older than you. I've had people at Minerva University who have Israelis who have done 2 years in the army and then come to university. I've had
Yeah.
people who've done 3 gap years and then come to university. I've had people who've worked and then felt the need that, okay, I want to go back to school and get a degree. And so, in fact, a joke I make is that I'm the youngest Minervan, so I'm 17, and the eldest Minervan is 27. And so he has this whole life journey and he's worked so long, and but he just felt like he wanted to come back to school and sort of take a break. And that is very interesting. Like speaking with to people, because especially for many of us, we've sort of been in some sort of, I believe, a comfort zone in a bubble, just been through school, been safe and sheltered under our parents, and then jump into university.
Mm.
A lot of people you meet at university will have spent time living on their own, traveling alone, working on their own, sort of coming to university as adults. Versus I believe some of us come as teenagers and then transform into adults through university. So I think that is so valuable. I always talk about learnings outside the classroom being as impactful as learnings inside the classroom at uni. But I just wanted to make that sort of add on here. Um, do you feel like you have similar experiences you want to talk about in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, I concur fully. I think, especially with the master's program, because in my accommodation at university, you have students from actually all different London universities, UCL, King's College, Kaplan, and in some of the master's programs, I've met students who are much older. And yeah, I think that was at first, I was like, okay, wow. our preconception of university is that people are young, people have gone straight from school. But then what I realized is so many people come back and pursue their masters after time in the industry or time in the corporate world, and there is so much knowledge to gain from them. I found, there are so many interesting stories, experiences they share with you, knowledge and insights into the real world that we don't have yet that they can give you, that I think is truly invaluable. So yeah, I think I concur in terms of that small initial shock about the age diversity, and actually the fact that it can give you so much sort of insights and knowledge and understanding, and sort of, yeah, just it can enlighten you in quite a big way, really, in terms of what life's really like out there.
Yeah, I mean, my advice to high schoolers is I know that some of them might be sort of in an accommodation with only undergrads, but I know many universities are sort of a mix of undergrads and masters as well as PhDs. And so, if possible, this could be a lab, this could be a classroom, accommodation. Take the time to get to know your seniors, the students doing the masters, the students doing the PhDs. Just how we do like coffee chats with professionals to understand the industry, understand from people who have worked in the industry and then come back to school for whatever reason. Like, what are their motivations? What have they learned? Invaluable, absolutely. Like, these are all sort of, I believe, like we pay for the education, but there's so many other things which like we get beyond just the education, which are sort of there's no price you sort of put on, let's say, the
Yeah,
network they're building, the friends, the interaction with the masters, students, the professors taking that extra hour to help you with your essay. You sort of can't put a cost on that, but that's all part of sort of the university experience and what you can get out of it. Yeah,
truly.
awesome. In fact, we've sort of dived deep into a mix of your before university and your university days. But I'll sort of get us back to the before university days. Especially, I'm sure there are many high schoolers listening for whom potentially KCL is a dream, and so it is among the top 5 universities. And so I always love to ask to walk through with guests as to how did they differentiate their application to a university and stand out to, I'm sure, what is a highly selective institution. And so I'm sort of taking you back down memory lane, maybe like pushing
Yeah,
you in that sense. But whatever you remember from your application, what would you say were positive aspects? What went really well?
I'd say when it comes to applying, something I tried to do and I did in my application, I think that would be important for all applications, is engaging with wider resources and materials for your course. So I try to read books and try to show an engagement with my course prior to actually attending, and show that in my application, and try to see why that stood me out and why that made me a strong candidate, what skills I had. So I think tailoring your application to yourself, making it unique, yeah, I'd say is a big thing, is showing your engagement with the subject on a wider level, and also making it unique and about yourself, and not making it just generic, that kind of thing.
You're in your case, having good history knowledge and showing that you are well read on the subject. Where does that come across on the application? Is it like the essays or?
So for UK applications, you don't have to write an essay. It's more just a personal statement. And I think in that you would discuss what you've engaged with towards the middle of the end. You start off with what you want to study, why you want to study it, your past, what motivated you, your sort of inspiration as such. And then I'd say touch on what you've engaged with somewhere in the middle, somewhere towards the end, just so you finish on a sort of strong point, and they see, okay, he wants to do this, we've seen his motivations, we've seen why he likes it, and this is how he's engaged with it. Good. He is really, interested, and he's a hard worker, and he's keen, and sorry, I say he, I mean he or she.
Yeah.
The individual is very motivated to study it. I think that's what wider engagement definitely shows.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm glad that we're clarifying these things. I am approaching this as someone who only knows the US application
Yeah,
process very well. And so in that sense, I might be asking you some basic or clarifying questions, but hopefully this is useful to someone listening who's also sort of unsure. So from what you're saying on the personal statement, if I were to recap, very important to show engagement with the subject. So you begin with sort of your motivation for studying history, and
yeah,
then you're saying like name drop maybe a book you've read or some material you've engaged with, show how you're like so passionate and fascinated and you know something about the subject before diving into the course. Would
ab-
you summarize that? Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, that's
um,
perfect.
Another thing I wanted to clarify with you, and this actually brings up slightly different responses for each of the UK guests I've had on the episodes, is I know US has a huge focus on extracurriculars. Like they love to see that you've done these 20 different things beyond your academics. Good grades are just one part of getting in. Like what will get you to further rounds is sort of being an interesting person holistically. In the UK, my general understanding is that it's more of grades and academics, plus the personal statement being very important. How important are extracurriculars to the whole application?
I'll be honest, when you talk about extracurriculars like sport, instruments, what we typically think of as, playing sport, instruments, passions, hobbies, we were always advised to mention them, but not sort of harp on about them.
Mm.
Mention them to show the uniqueness and show you as a person. But I think the biggest thing, when I think of extracurricular, the main extracurricular thing that will be important is your engagement with the subject, but from a outside of school perspective, from an extracurricular perspective in that way. Your engagement, the books you've read, have you listened to lectures, maybe online courses offered on Coursera, Khan Academy, things like that, have you read articles, those kind of things, I'd say.
Okay.
Like, I mentioned my sport in my application, I did, but not too much. I just, you can talk about how maybe if you're into sport, it gives you leadership skills or team skills, and that makes you a good individual for your career path that you've chosen, but not essentially for a course. So I think you can mention it, but it's not the biggest thing. I think there's a very heavy emphasis, obviously, first on the grades,
Yeah.
because in the UK, there are very, very rarely do you get an unconditional offer.
Mm.
Usually a conditional offer. I was made aware that recently unconditionals are more common in the US. You can let me know if that's true or not.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, they're not very common at all in the UK. So grades are the biggest thing, right? It's conditional on your grade. So at the end of the day, you have to work for that grade, and that's the biggest thing. But also, I think your engagement with the subject outside of it is the biggest extracurricular thing I'd add.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, what I'll add to your list is if you've done an internship in the subject, if you've written a research paper on the subject, if you worked with the professor who's teaching that at university, done some project with him. So it seems like anything related to what you're wanting to pursue counts as like really great extracurriculars.
Yeah,
Uh, Touch upon things like sport and art and dance. And when you're touching upon those, from what I'm understanding what you're saying, focus more on the macro skills you've gained from them versus like I did these 10 different soccer competitions. And
exactly.
I led the team and that's why I have good leadership skills overall, or I'm a good
The
communicator.
transferable skills almost. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, glad we touched upon that. On the flip side, I
Hmm.
know I'm sure a lot of things went well and right in your application. That's why you're sitting here today at KCL. But we've all made certain mistakes. Like it's the first time for all of us. We all wish we had done some things differently. So I love asking this to guests. It's brought me a lot of really good answers. But what are like mistakes you've made, or what is something you wish you did differently while applying?
Oh, okay. That's a good question, actually. And I think that actually it is an important point actually I'd like to make is that something that I did wrong or something I think I was very close to doing wrong and a mistake I made in my approach to the personal statement at the start was I sort of did my first draft and wrote it in the perspective of what I thought they wanted to hear. And I sort of tried to make it very much okay, this is what they want to hear, my grades, they hammer on about my grades, why I'm a good student, why I think I'm smart, why I think I'm capable in this way, how the grades transfer into university life, and sort of talk only about the subject and nothing else, and only about my grades and my academics. I think I started thinking that's what you'd have to do. But I think something that I did eventually that I think worked well for me, and I would advise everyone. I've helped people in the past. I've helped friends who, after I've graduated, I've helped them. I've sort of proofread some of their personal statements and stuff like that. Something I've always said and something I've always liked what I've read is having a personal touch to it and actually showcasing you as a person, because at the end of the day it's you as a person that's going to the university, right? Talk about what makes you unique, how your particular engagement with that subject is unique to you, how the books you've read have developed your perspective, your understanding, and why you think it makes you more interested in what you want to study and why you'd be a good fit. Really tailoring it, personalizing it, and not making it generic. What I think make it stand out on that pile of applications that a university, admissions officer has. I'm sure he'll remember one small interesting fact that you've talked about the subject, but also to do with your perspective. That will probably stick out and stay in his mind than just a generic statement. I think making it really unique, personal, and tailored to what you believe and the way you see things. is something that I would say is quite crucial and will hold you in good stead when applying.
Okay. And what you said, I think, also is a good way to counter this very easy to trap which many students fall into, which is this is the application of someone who got into Harvard. Let's tweak some certain small
Yeah,
things, and
great.
like, this is going to get me into Harvard.
I don't
But
think that's ever going to work.
yeah, I really don't think that works. From what I've heard from episodes on the podcast, and they want every. I'm just using Harvard, but they want every Harvard student to be different in their own way. And
Mm.
you don't want two students who are like they already have a student. If you're trying to be that mimic that student, like be. I always say like be the human, don't be the god. They are well aware that you have had your learning curve, and so it's not been smooth all the way, but using like challenges or setbacks or failures to talk about what you learned along the way. And if after that that led to some success, that's also a great story to sort of emphasize the learning curve. Yeah. We will fast forward a little bit and touch a little more on your during university days. And so it's been 2 years at KCL. There's a few things I'd love to pick your brain on here. First thing which we'll start with, we began the episode talking a lot about history and the course specifically. And so coming back to that, want to ask you about how your course is structured over the 3 years. And is it just general history, or do you begin with general history and you then choose to specialize in something?
Sure. So with history, I think so. The first year was very much fixed modules. There were no modules we could choose, and it covered periods of time from medieval, early sort of ancient medieval history to modern day history. So it widened your breadth of knowledge and gave you an understanding across a wide range of periods and eras that then allowed me in the second year to choose the modules that I wanted to do and what I was interested in. In the second year, you get a chance to choose, right?
Hmm.
So I chose some modules that I really loved and some that I found very interesting. One of them was investigating the colonial past of King's College London, which actually actively looks at the role that KCL has played in the British Empire in the past.
Yeah.
And it's natural that they would have played the role because they're a very big institution. They've been around for a long time. They were operating during that period, so you can't expect them to not have had a role. And I think what's interesting about that module is when we've studied it, it's not been to villainize or portray KCL and their involvement in a bad light. It's actually been just to understand the involvement and understand how the institution was involved and how they've decolonized over time. So yeah, I really loved that module. I did one on the history of globalization, which was a more economic based one. I did one called the Good Migrant, which looks at migration in the 1900s and 2000s, and it gives you history on that, on the legislation, on the movements, on the cultural parts of it. So such a wide variety of modules in the second year. So yeah, first year was very fixed in what you studied. It was from all periods. Second year was a lot more. Here you go, have fun, choose what you like.
Yeah. And academically, I know probably a big part, I'm assuming, of the third year will be the dissertation.
Yeah.
But academically, what's the third year going to look like beyond the dissertation?
It's going to look similar to the second year in terms of you have elective modules. You have elective modules that you take. I still haven't received which modules I've been given, allocated. I've chosen which ones I'd like. You do it in like a preference order. You choose your top 3 or 4. You're not guaranteed, but yeah, you choose your top 3 or 4, and then you get allocated your modules for the next year when they do the timetabling and they see how many students have chosen which module, can they all fit in and things like that. So yeah, I mean, so that's what's been on there. That's what the process has been so far. That's what's been going on for the third year. I'm waiting to hear back. But yeah, that's the process from that side.
Hmm. My observation, again, from UK versus US guests, is that in the US, we take a lot of classes completely unrelated to our major. And so those are what we call electives. I think you're using elective in a different sense as something you're choosing within history. But I wanted to ask you about sort of my definition of electives, which is how many classes have you taken so far over the 2 years, which have been non-history classes, like something unrelated? Have you had those options? Okay.
None. They've all been. I mean, you have the opportunity to do language modules and take modules from different courses if that interests you. But I've liked the modules we've been offered, and I've really wanted to hone in on those. So yeah,
Wow. Okay, that's a big difference then between US, UK.
I've picked up on that. Yes, I mean, I know that in the US you study a lot of electives from different. For example, we had exchange students in some of my modules from the US that were studying something completely not related to history. Someone was doing music, and someone was doing psychology, but they were doing a history subject or module. because that was one of their electives, right?
Yeah.
So I actually find that very fascinating and do sometimes wish that our university was like that, or the British education system was like that in terms of universities, because I think it's amazing to be able to have that choice to, let's say I'm studying now, I'm doing history as my degree, but I love economics and I love geography as well. So I'd have loved to have been able to take a module on economics or a module on, human geography, which I really enjoy. So yeah, I think that's something that I've always thought is good about the American system, and it's something that maybe could be implemented in the British system. But it's been that way for a long time at universities in the UK, so it's a big change. But maybe one day you'd get that chance. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, pros and cons. I have friends who are literally taking like out of 100, like 50% of their classes are major specific, and the other 50% are all non-major specific.
Okay.
Some ways they wish like they haven't learned enough depth about their major versus someone like you done history over the 2 years. And so I guess the way I would put it is sort of different pull factors for different type of students. Some students
Yeah.
very clear and want to be sort of tunnel vision, focused on one subject, which is perfectly good, as well as some students like myself would love to like be studying 3 or 4 different things at the same time. For which I'm assuming the US might be a better place than the UK, in that sense. If you have like these 3, 4 different things you like to touch upon. So yeah, different pull factors is how I would put it. Wanted to ask you about at a school like KCL, and this is a question which is sort of almost becoming my favorite to ask everyone, because I think as we talked about how in university you pay the fees, and then you sort of take advantage of these 2, 3 things. But I feel like there's so many resources the university offers which students might not even be aware of. Like I didn't even know that this existed and that my university would help me with this until like my third year. And so, in your experience, has there been anything like that? Any resource at KCL you wish you had sort of extracted more juice from over the 2 years?
I think actually something that I know is available and that I definitely haven't extracted to the extent that I probably should have, and I would like to extract more in this year, is actually the availability of the resources in the library, books.
Yeah,
We have something called the Mon Library, which is our library, and there is an absolutely incredible sort of pool of resources, and it's an ocean of knowledge there that you can tap into on all subjects. So I think I'd say maybe in this year I'd like to pick up books on completely unrelated topics that I'm not studying at all,
yeah,
and just something, an idea I had. I know it sounds random, but maybe even go in there and just go into a random section and just blind pick, go
yeah.
blind to a book and read it, even if you don't like the look of it to start with. They say don't judge a book by its cover. So maybe just to open my horizons and broaden my horizons to new topics. So yeah,
Mm.
simply that.
Yeah, I mean, please go check out a university library. Lovely places with just the energy of some of focus, of patience, of getting things done. Every student comes like sort of. I mean, we have a joke that whenever a student goes to the library, that means they want to get shit done. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that energy is there in the libraries. Of
Yeah,
course, the resources. I think many people are unaware that their university email ID can unlock many resources for free, which
that's
would be
true.
paid otherwise. Sort of different research papers and things on EBSCO, as well as JustCon are just names that come to mind off the top of my mind. But yeah, make use of the university email ID. I would say make
Yeah.
use of the physical libraries as well.
You
Uh,
get, I think JSTOR is one online that's very good as well. It's got a lot of resources. It's got a lot of papers that have been written that I use for my history essays. So yeah, that's a very good point, and I think a lot of resources are available through your university ID. So yeah, that's actually a very good point you raise.
yeah, for sure. Now that you're sort of wrapping up your final summer at KCL, and so if someone's doing a 4 years, there's 3 summers. For you, it's just the 2 summers.
That's the 3 year course. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
This is the 3 year course. This is a big anxiety factor for a lot of students. Just when they get into freshman year, is
Mm.
planning for the next summer, internships, work, research. What do I want to be spending my time on? Because these are long summers. I don't know for your case how long it is, but we've got about 3.5, 4 month summers, as per many of my friends. So would love to dive into how you've spent the 2 summers so far, and even beyond internships, any other creative suggestions on how to have a summer well spent at after a year of university?
I think in terms of internships, let's start with that. I know a lot of people always, myself included, will fret about, what am I going to do this summer in terms of my academics or my professional life? How am I going to advance it, build my resume, do internships? So I personally did two internships for the last 2 summers. I did, I've done them both with the same firm called Marching Sheep, who are based out of Delhi in India. I've done them online. The first year I wrote a legal research paper on the employment and education frameworks in 17 different countries
Wow.
for persons with disabilities, right? Who are often referred to as PWDs as a short form. Now, these reports were published individually and as a collection by my firm, and they're used with the clients of the firm to the reports I wrote. So, for example, if a client has a office or operation in one of the countries, for example, India, they would then look at the RPWD, which is the rights for persons with disabilities. They'd use that sort of document to integrate persons with disabilities into their workplace as best as possible, right? So that was what that internship was. And that actually carried on into the first half of my second year, and it was published in December last year. And this year, I'm doing one with the same company. I'm leading a project on acid attacks. And there's two halves of the project. The first one is looking at the legislation in terms of preventing the sale of acid, and the legislation in terms of punishment for these perpetrators of the crime, and also the support that survivors are receiving by the government. And the second half of the project is looking at how we can actually on the ground make a change. So we've tied up with NGOs and with multinational corporations, and we're aiming to integrate these survivors into the workplace. It's a very tough thing for them to do usually, because there are preconceptions, and there are sort of societal views towards skin grafts, and it's quite sad. Society may not accept it so openly, and there's sort of pre-existing notions in society, and biases and judgments that people have. So it's very tough for them to find a job,
Yeah,
right? But we're trying to really get them access to employment and work directly with the NGO that has them, at helping them, and work with the multinational corporation. So right now I've been liaising with both, and we're going to try and find a way to fit them together and make a change on the ground. So that's the project I'm working on now. So in terms of internships, that's what I've done. And that's how I've spent my 2 summers from that perspective. I'd say when you do an internship, a big thing is make sure you apply for a company or a firm which aligns very much with the values that you hold, the view and the vision that you have for the future. And like, yeah, I'd say with the values that you align with, because I think you want it to be something rewarding. A lot of people look at it as in they're like, will I gain money from it? Will it help me in this particular job, or will it pad my resume like this? But I think what's going to be most rewarding is the knowledge you gain from it, and not what it looks like on paper or what you gain financially. It's actually the knowledge you gain and the way that it's going to give you skills that you can transfer into future life. And
Mm.
also, in terms of having a good summer, don't forget to have fun. My brother stays in Bangalore, which is where I am now. So as well as doing internships in both the summers, we've done bike trips. We spend a lot of time. We go around. We have fun. We meet friends. Occasional parties here and there. You got to also enjoy your summer,
Yeah.
because you worked hard in the year. So it's a mix of both. I'd say that's what makes a good summer for me.
Yeah, I would say from an energy point of view, very important to be getting into the next year not burnt out.
Yeah.
Like many of us might come home burnt out, which is reasonable. Having worked hard at university, being in a new country, and having invested time, effort, it's worth it to like work hard. Be slightly burnt out when you enter the summer, but like over the summer is a good time to focus on things like health and diet,
Mm.
rest and fun, which might be like 20%, 30% neglected at university. But sort of get back, go very high energy for the next year. Like don't go sleep deprived and unhealthy and sort of. I think that's not a good way to start off the new year, to be very honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. It's funny, actually. I'd say that my most hectic's the wrong word, but my most busy period of the year is actually the summer.
Yeah.
Because when you're at university, you have your schedule, you have your classes, for me, the gym is a very big part of my schedule. I have the gym, my gym, the classes, when I hang out with my friends, that's one of the biggest things for me is my friends and connections around me. Like, I like spending time with them.
Mm.
So but you also have a sort of routine that you fall into with that. But then when you come back home in the summer, it's like it almost feels like you're on holiday, right? So you
Yeah.
don't know what's going to happen when. And even with when you have an internship like I do, I'm traveling around a lot. Mine's remote, so I can do it on the fly wherever I am. Family functions here. I'm flying out for a wedding tomorrow to a different city. So yeah, I think it's very busy, but it's also a very fun. It's a very fun period of time. So whilst it may feel like, oh my god, there's so much going on, I think I enjoy that sort of hustle and bustle of the summer, getting to meet so many people, getting to go around. Yeah, but I think it's also important, like you said, to take some time to really relax and
Mm.
do the things you enjoy and that make you you so that you go back into the new year looking forward to it and refreshed. I think.
Yeah, I think that's a valuable distinction. And also just getting back to your answer on the internships, I sort of am making a mental note
Hmm,
to ensure that you send me the work post the
sure.
podcast. Both sound like super interesting.
Hmm.
As a sort of a whole world I dived into after watching the sort of famous movie Chapak with Deepika. That
Yes.
sort of I never knew about that something like that even happened in the country. Honestly, before watching that movie, glad that like sort of the research you're doing is spreading awareness on topics which are less well known and having an impact. Is I think always good for research. In terms of you talked a little bit about actually approaching an internship from the point of view of a company that would be a good fit for you in terms of values and mindset and worldview. I want to fast forward to actually having the internship, and so you've gotten the acceptance offer. Today is day one. What are any sort of tips or tricks or best practices for actually having a smooth and successful internship, like maximizing the value you get from those 2 or 3 months?
I'd say I'd say honestly, throw yourself into it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I remember when I first started my internship last year. It was my first time working in like what you could call the professional world, right, or the corporate world. So the first few weeks were very much like, okay, getting up to pace with it, okay, so this is how it works. This is how a real life HR firm works in the world, weekly meetings and, you're on the group chat and you're seeing like deals being closed and like, everything. And it's like, it can seem a bit daunting. So I'd say the first thing is don't be afraid to make mistakes, ask the questions, get to know the way that it works, learn about the processes that work. Because I think a very big thing in internships as well as the work is learning how the firms operate
Yeah.
and how companies operate and how business in the real world in the sector you want to go into really operates. So I'd say that's one thing is try and gain as much knowledge as you can from that. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Ask questions. Ask your mentors, your mentees, so your mentors who are sort of taking care of you. Ask your boss. Ask your colleagues. Just try and really pull out and extrapolate all the sort of knowledge you can get and just go head first into it and just yeah just take as much as you can from it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, to ask a stupid question, because only when you ask those things do you gain the knowledge. And then eventually after maybe a week or 2 weeks you'll find yourself feeling a part of the company, you're working smoothly, and yeah, things will go well.
Yeah, I love that idea, and sort of a very basic analogy which I love bringing up wherever relevant is be a sponge. And I think this is beyond internships at university. Like be a sponge, absorb everything, like have your five senses open,
Mm.
be listening, visually notice everything you're seeing.
Yeah.
Like you're in a new environment, you're with new people.
Yeah.
There's so much learning if you're able to like take your absorption level to the next level.
Really
Like
soak it in. Mm.
that stuff is always going on, but it's about your level of observation. As to like someone will observe five things, someone will observe 10 things, another person will observe 20 things. The same things were going on for all those three people, but it's like who has a lot of the more high quality sponge, I guess. Sticking with the analogy. But yeah, I think what you said broadly generalizes to university as well. Like get a feel for that environment, get a feel for that place, get a feel for if this is an interest, how the world of academia and research works. Yeah. So far, it's been a very comprehensive conversation. Like we touched upon KCL application. We talked about your course and history. We talked about studying in London and what's that like. Want to touch a little more on this law school aspect because again, the assumption I'm making is at least some people listening to this episode are interested in history or law school, and that's why they're listening even beyond KCL as an institution. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that at least the thinking has begun from your end over this summer in terms of law school, getting in, applying. And so I genuinely am net zero knowledge on this. So walk us through from the basics as an undergrad, someone who's attempting to get into law school. How are you approaching it? Like, what's the application like? How are you working to make your applicant application very strong and differentiated?
Sure. So, in terms of applying for law in the UK, which is what I'm doing now after my undergrad, you do something called a GDL, which is a law conversion course, a graduate diploma in law. Um, so, I think to apply for that, I will be applying this year. I think I'm hoping the two internships that I've done so far, and I'm in the process of, both of them were very. One of the first one was very much focused purely on legislation. The second one does incorporate legislation as a big part, the first part of the project. So I'm hoping those two will feed in well into my application, into what I can talk about on my application. And so, in terms of the application procedure, I'm going to be filling it out this year, hopefully talking about my experience in these two internships, also my wider interest in the subject, other books that I'm planning to read now in the coming few months that I can also talk about. And then, also you need two references, I believe, one or two references, academic references. So I'm planning to get those and then submit the applications by, I think Jan is the deadline, so I'd like it done in December. If I work towards December as my deadline, I give myself a bit of breathing space. If anything goes wrong last minute, anything I have to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's where things are going right now in terms of my applications.
Yeah, lovely. I mean, all the best. And I'm. It's always interesting to me how there are some there are some similarities between sort of applying for undergrad and also applying for like the masters, which is the letters
Yeah.
of recommendation and the grades and the internships and work experience. Do you feel like you'll be approaching this in terms of we've talked about on a higher level, sort of the mindset of how you approach the application, differentiating yourself, like you would stick to all of those same pieces of advice if you were to give yourself when applying to law school?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when when I applied for undergrad, I thought that was it for me in terms of like applications. I didn't consider the fact that I'd be reapplying in a few years for masters of a postgrad. But yeah, I mean, now that I find myself back in that procedure, I think just sticking to the same thing, making my application unique, talking about the work I've done, I'd say in the last 2 years, what I've done within history itself. I've had some modules that have looked at legislation, showing my involvement there with the legal subject, the legal industry. Yeah, I think just what I'll try and do is personalize it. Also, obviously, you have to hit the goals that they want to. Some key parts you have to hit, some key points.
Yeah.
But I think on the whole, I'd like it to be tailored to who I am as an individual, why I want to go into law, my aspirations within law,
Yeah.
my long-term aspirations, and hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, it gets me into law school. Let's see. There's a plan out there for all of us, so let's see if it's written in.
Yeah, I'm sure everything will work out in the end. As it worked out for the undergrad application, it will work out for the law school.
Yeah, very kind.
Yeah. As we begin wrapping up, what's been, I think, a really comprehensive conversation, maybe we've sort of catered to different interests of even listeners, touching upon so many different topics. We sort of have some idea of where you're going in terms of law school and then becoming a solicitor. But I wanted to ask you, very long term, once you're a solicitor, what's the plan? Like, what do you want to do with this education?
I'd say so. I have a couple of long-term goals that I've always had for a while now. Within law, I'm quite interested in human rights law. So I'd like to get into human rights law in the long term, work with companies like the UN, human rights groups. And I've always believed the reason I want to go into law is to fight for the people that don't have a voice, to fight for themselves, people that may be facing injustices. Yeah, so that's an aspect I'd like to get into in terms of law is human rights. And I think when it comes to my personal goals, where I want to take it in the future, if you said to me that I had all my goals achieved and they be guaranteed, I think the two things that I'd want definitely done and I'd like to do would be, one is I've always dreamed of having my own NGO.
Okay.
I'd like to set up an NGO that goes to underdeveloped cities and regions in continents across the world. I think predominantly Asia, South America, and Africa. These underdeveloped towns and cities, and implement educational and healthcare infrastructure Because personally I believe if those two pieces of infrastructure, those two facilities are there in even the smallest of underdeveloped villages in, say, rural Africa or rural India, rural South America, you can really change it for generations to come. It'll have a cyclical effect of breaking people out of that poverty cycle. And so that's what I'd like to do. One day somehow secure the funding for it, get investors and start up that NGO.
Mm.
And also, on a personal note, the gym is a big part of my life. So I'd like to set up my own gym and hopefully one day a chain of gyms, either across a single country or across the world. Let's see.
Wow.
That would be nice. But yeah, that's I would say is a long term goals in terms of like my professional life and what I'd like to, how I'd like to take my education forward. That's what you said. Yeah.
That's very long term, and I really commend that because I've had a lot of people on the podcast speaking about right after graduation and sort of 1 year, 2 years, 3 to 5 years, which is also great. Having that kind of a vision is not easy, but sort of it's much more difficult in your case. Like you've got sort of what is it, like a decade long vision, I'm assuming. I think it's always lovely to sort of, as Stephen Covey puts it, is like beginning with the end in mind, and the end can change, but you sort of should begin with some end in mind, even if
Yeah.
that sort of slightly tweaks along the way, because you have sort of an ultimate dream to work towards. And I'm sure that's what sort of is getting you out of bed, even when you're like sleepy and wanting to stay in bed, is sort of getting you out of bed and making you do all of these different things you're doing. So yeah, yeah, I really like that. And I'm excited to see what the future holds. You're going to be graduating earlier than me, and so once I finish graduating, I'm excited to see what you are doing in terms of the work and professionally.
Very kind.
Yeah, we will jump into the fast fire round of questions. Um, this is how we like to wrap up each episode on a slightly more exciting, fast paced, intense note. Also challenging for you because I'm going to restrict your answers to one phrase or one sentence.
Okay.
But I'm hoping this sort of brings out, again, some interesting, quick responses. So if you're ready, we can jump into this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. We'll start with what's the most fascinating class you've taken thus far at KCL?
I'd say it's a module called The Good Migrant, which was investigating migration trends and patterns and the culture behind it, and the legislation behind it in the 1900s and the 2000s. So yeah, that was very interesting.
Okay, sounds interesting. I asked this to my history professor, and sort of this became a good question, which I want to ask now to every history geek, which is who's one like significant historical figure who pretty much no one knows about, or almost no one knows about, like very underrated.
I'd say Robert Clive, who I touched on earlier.
Mm,
Um, I think underrated may be the wrong word that I'd go for, but definitely not known as widely is what I'd say, and the impact that he had from both the British Empire perspective and the colonial perspective. Yeah,
okay. Maybe I'll go and read up a quick Wikipedia article once this is done, sort of get to know who he is.
sure.
What's a book recommendation for a history geek who's really enjoyed this episode?
I'd say India After Gandhi by Ramachandra Guha is interesting. It touches upon how after independence, India has found itself in the state that it is today and in its current position, for all its strengths and weaknesses that it has, how it's found itself here. So, yeah.
Hmm. Something we haven't gotten a chance to dive deep on, which I'm sure is an episode in itself, is your personal transformation at university. Like I'm sure the Ash who entered KCL is very different from the Ash today versus the Ash from 1 year from now. And I think many people, like even guests I've had on the podcast after the episode, their observation has been, I didn't realize that I grew so much over 3 or 4 years. Like almost can't recognize the person from before. So personal transformation is a huge one. And so I know this is obviously a much longer answer, but if I were to ask you from one big personal change you've seen in yourself from high school Ash versus Ash today, what's that big change?
I'd say the biggest change that I've seen, or the biggest thing I've noticed now that I know in my mind, is that I'd like to take every opportunity that comes my way, whether it be taking a new class, whether it be talking to someone about a new topic, whether it be reading up about something new, whether it be learning a new skill, or taking an extra 5 minutes that suddenly comes up and just spending it with a friend at university, or I think just the opportunities that are presented to us in life, not missing out on them because they go past you without even realizing. You maybe reflect on how the first 2 years have passed so fast that I think That's probably the biggest thing I'd say is now I realize that every opportunity that comes your way, just try and grab it, make the most of it because you never know when it's gonna fly by.
Literally, I've had literal experience of what you're saying in terms of opportunities flying by. And so there have been many times at university where I've walked past someone, wanted to say something, and have not, and sort of just walked
Mhm.
past. And there have been times where I sort of muster up the courage to just say hi. And those have been some of the like the most memorable conversations I've had at university. And so when you're walking on campus, opportunities are literally flying by you, literally,
Yeah,
in terms of being speaking and interacting with a prof or a student. So I mean, as Ash said, don't miss those opportunities. Literally, like grab a hold of them. But yeah, I really like that. What's this is a lighter one, but what's a dish from home that you missed a ton while in central London?
I'd say a chicken shawarma is something that I always enjoy eating in Hyderabad. And something I definitely miss that sort of authentic feel of it that I get back here in India. Yeah, that's the first thing I ate when I landed actually this year. I mean, obviously I had breakfast that day, but the first thing I ate outside of our house was that shawarma. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean that's the value of coming home, which we realize after going abroad, in terms of food, especially and mother's food,
Mm.
um, and like you can only eat out X days. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I think,
Uh,
yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, no, I was going to say also the comfort foods at home, like
Yeah.
normal rice and dal, which is a very basic food, but it's such a comfort food that like I was craving so heavily after a while.
Mm.
Yeah, I think those kind of stuff. Just as you said, home food, nothing beats it.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Last of the fast fire round is I love asking this to almost every guest who comes on. Just because I personally am sort of always searching for wisdom and philosophy in every conversation. What's any one wise quote or saying that has stuck with you over the years or motivated you over the years?
I think I'll probably touch on my favorite quote of all time now. It's from Rocky, the movie, and it's one particular sentence in the wider quote. He says, "It ain't about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep going. That's how winning's done." And I
Wow.
think I think that to me really resonates because there's going to be things that knock you down. There's going to be setbacks. There's going to be assignments you thought you smashed but you didn't do well. There's going to be friends that you unfortunately lose along the way. There's going to be experiences that are bad that I guess make you think that suddenly everything's going wrong. Nothing's going to plan. You're like, oh God, where am I? Where do I find myself? But I think the way you pick yourself up in that moment, be it in your personal life, your academic life, whatever it may be, just the way you pick yourself up and keep going is going to lead you, I think, to long-term success. And, not that I've experienced any great success yet, but I think personally, I believe that's what's going to make you successful in life and what will make me hopefully one day successful is just persevering through tough times. And I think that's what I advise everyone.
Yeah, you need to rewatch Rocky. It's been years.
Great movie. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Lastly, as we're wrapping up, it's honestly been a fabulous conversation, which I really enjoyed, learned a ton because I came into it not knowing about KCL or history or law school. So I'm sure you've taught me and listeners a lot over the course of the last about an hour and a half. What's one final message you'd like to leave listeners with? I'm assuming most of our listeners are high schoolers, so they're about to embark on this journey of university and then dive headfirst into the real world. Any one final piece of wisdom or insight?
Hmm. I think I'd go back to what I said before. And if I was to put it into one phrase, it would be take that chance. 3 words, just take the chance. Whether it be talking to, a random person in your class, in your accommodation, reading a book that you think you may not like, but you think you might like, but may not have time to. Sorry, read that book. Exploring the one museum or going to that one corner of the city that you always wanted to go to, or taking the class that your friends aren't, but you think is interesting. I think you never know what opportunities are quite literally and metaphorically around the corner.
Mhm.
So just take that chance, is what I'd say, because it'll open your eyes and open you up to amazing experiences.
I relate so much to the museum specifically. I was thinking back to this one museum in San Francisco called the Legion of Honor, which was out of the way. And so I sort of had not had, didn't have sort of the motivation to go all the way to do the museum for the whole semester. And that actually turned out to be my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah, not missing the chance. Especially the place where you find yourself while at university. A big regret from many of my seniors is that they didn't enjoy the city enough. Like they were so busy in on campus and in their textbooks, and then after university and graduation, they moved to a different place, not being able to like enjoy the beautiful place you're in. That could be a big city, that could be a suburb, but make it your second home and really take the time to go off campus and walk the streets. Is what I'll say here. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, I could probably pick your brain for as much time as we've already spoken. But sort of, I feel like it's a good time to bring the episode to a wrap. And so, as we bring this conversation to an end, if a listener would like to connect or has follow up questions, what do you think is a good way to reach you?
My Instagram is ashlesh.c. You can feel free to follow me and drop me a message on there. If not, I think my WhatsApp number is also with yourself. So if any listeners want to reach out to you for my number, that's also, they can feel free to. And I'd be happy to, answer any questions or just get to know anyone who wants to have a chat about anything that I've spoken about or anything that you think I might be interested in. Yeah, always looking to make new connections and meet new people. So
Yeah, I can vouch for that. It's probably the fifth time Ash has asked me for coffee, and so we'll definitely make that happen before I fly off back to university. But overall, thank you so much for your wise words on Uni Unveiled on the podcast. Was a pleasure to host you, and hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
no, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've also learned a lot from you and your experiences of whatever you mentioned. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.
All right, that was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on Uni Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Uni Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to Uni Unveiled.